Welcome, nutritionradio.org listeners. This is Lonnie Lowry, University Nutrition Professor of over 20 years and podcast host of long-running shows like Iron Radio. Come on in. Trends in Science.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to nutritionradio.org, where we explore fascinating topics, the intersection between science and everyday life. In today's episode, we're going to dive into a popular and beloved beverage, especially for myself, coffee. We're going to be discovering the relationship between coffee and health, just in a sort of light touch preview kind of way. So grab your favorite cup and let's get started. We're going to start with a Facebook post from listener Ed, longtime listener. Thanks for this, Ed. He says, Dr. Lowry, thought you might be interested in this. This is from Mino Henselman's page. He's referring to a new paper in March's Pharmaceut Med. Here's a quote for you. Coffee's health effects are hotly debated. A new scientific review concluded that overall filtered coffee is good for your health and its consumption is associated with lower mortality rates. That's very true. I've definitely seen those studies. The health benefits primarily come from phytochemicals, right? These plant substances in coffee. Obviously, it's a plant. Notably, it's polyphenols that have antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. Now, before we explore the health aspects, let's briefly understand what makes up a cup of coffee. It's a very complex matrix, hundreds of compounds. Plus, of course, these vary, right? Quote unquote coffee. It's not just one thing. There's bean type, roasting method, grind, brew method, additives, timing of ingestion, like before exercise. We'll get to that in coming weeks. They all differ among studies, and they all matter. Okay, let's talk about the composition a little bit. Coffee is composed mostly of water, of course, preferably very good water at a very specific temperature when you brew it. But then we've got caffeine, right, which is most people just look at coffee as almost a caffeine vehicle, liquid caffeine. It's definitely not that. There's antioxidants and other compounds. Probably at center stage, I would say, are the coffee polyphenols like chlorogenic acids. I mean, other than the caffeine, right, the superstar, we've got chlorogenic acids. There's also a niacin-like compound called trigonelin, which, among other molecules, serves to produce part of that aroma, those aroma compounds. It breaks down partly into the B vitamin niacin, by the way. Coffee is a source of niacin. And in terms of concentration, trigonelin is higher for Arabica beans than for Robusta beans. And then lastly, I'll just touch on diterpenes. The coffee oil is rich in these diterpenes, mostly cafestol and hawiol. And again, in this case, Arabica beans have more. Despite the benefits, though, including some anti-carcinogenic, anti-cancer properties, these diterpenes are also associated with certain negative consequences like elevating your blood cholesterol, especially when there's no paper filter involved, because that'll take care of a lot of that when it comes to brewing. And by the way, I'm not a food chemist. I would suggest you go check out something like coffeechemistry.com. It's just a really cool website if you don't like digging straight into like PubMed type literature. Okay, if we can all agree that coffee is not just one thing when it's served. I mean, imagine telling a wine connoisseur, oh, wine is just wine. It's all the same thing. You'd get backhanded, right? Same thing with coffee. So, health benefits, though, of coffee. Obviously, this has been the subject of extensive research. There are many studies looking at the health benefits of coffee. Some of it's a little controversial, at least the history of it. But I think we're settling into this idea that, yes, like the page that Ed posted there, probably healthy overall. I mean, let's just take a look at some of this. In fact, we will very soon in detail, especially in season 2, right, as we move into a little bit longer once weekly kinds of episodes. But if we delve into this, caffeine is the star, as everyone knows. We should talk about that first, although it may not be acting alone. When you look at a cup of coffee, there seems to be this entourage effect where these compounds work together. Obviously, caffeine by itself does work, although a little bit differently than what it does to the body in coffee, at least somewhat. And the literature will show that. Even the sports nutrition literature will show that. Caffeine is a methylxanthine. It's a stimulant for the central nervous system, largely because it blocks adenosine receptors. It's going to cause wakefulness. Surprisingly, though, it does not have a huge impact on heart rate or blood pressure, like a lot of people might think, or even heart rate variability, HRV. You'd think a stimulant would cause sympathetic drive, like fight or flight, and that would lower your HRV and make things worse. I've seen this in the lab, and other labs have too. Check out some of these abstracts at like the International Society of Sports Nutrition. But suffice it to say, it probably does improve various types of athletic performance, and not just from a psychological perspective, right? Now, chlorogenic acids, the other big player, it's sort of a collection of compounds, appear to affect everything from reaction time, yes, probably working with caffeine, to blood flow, to glucose tolerance, right? Carb handling. In fact, you see a lot of literature on diabetes prevention, and especially in observational sort of population studies. You don't always see it in acute studies, actually, where you're just feeding a carbohydrate challenge and, simultaneously with coffee and then seeing what happens to their blood sugar. You will see it some, though. On PubMed Central, you can actually see some work from our lab where we're looking at the effect of coffee on glucose handling in healthy college students. The tough thing in those settings, and we'll get to this in season 2, I think, is that caffeine may tend to raise blood sugar, right? Whereas the chlorogenic acids may tend to lower it. So there's sort of this tug of war, if you will, this sort of paradoxical effect that coffee provides compared to just pure caffeine, let's say. Okay, so in future weeks, like I said, we'll explore more on athletic performance. That's really my expertise, including doses and magnitude of effect. Like, how much are you getting out of this? And barbell speed, for example, or, whatever the test might be, reaction time. We're also going to look at effects on cognitive function, like attention, focus, memory, different processing, as well as coffee's role in reducing the risk of neurodegenerative diseases, right? I've seen quite a bit on things like dementia, Alzheimer's disease, things of that nature. So interesting stuff. And back to what we were saying, and, the page that Ed passed along, overall healthy, although I need to remind myself, as much as I love coffee for the cognitive effects and some of the health effects too, like pre-workout, I think it's an ideal pre-workout. We'll talk about that. But I have to be careful about confirmation bias. I love it. I want to hear good things about it, but if there's something bad about it, right? Science doesn't care what we want, so we got to be careful. Lastly, I just want to touch on individual differences, right? While coffee can have potential health benefits, it's important to consider individual differences and be mindful of those kinds of factors. Most of the population are fast metabolizers genetically, but some of us are slow metabolizers, and that can be good or bad depending on how you look at it. We'll touch on that as well. So that wraps up our preview, sort of a light touch 30,000-foot preview of coffee and its impact on health. One of the most drank beverages in the world, right? It's Americans' number one source of antioxidants. We really need to know about this stuff. And I just think sports nutrition is an interesting for me at least, as I look at a lot of these things. Obviously, a balanced lifestyle is key. You can overdo coffee. I personally am sensitive to it. I don't dare touch it after 2 p.m., even if I need it when I'm, in the lab or writing or something like that. But thanks for joining us today. We hope this discussion provided some valuable insights for you. So until next time, sip responsibly. Oh, and one last thing. If you found this episode informative or engaging, please be sure to subscribe to Nutrition Radio and Iron Radio. Nutrition Radio is more news. Iron Radio is going to be more discussions and obviously more lifting and sports related. But you're going to get intriguing discussions. And honestly, we'd love to hear your feedback. So please feel free to leave a review on YouTube. You can find us at Lawnman07 and just share your thoughts with this episode. So stay caffeinated and stay tuned for the next episode.
The NutritionRadio.org podcast is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, check with your physician, nutritionist, or qualified exercise physiologist in order to make the progress that you need.